All right, so we are together today to talk about Mark chapter 5, which will be for the sermon on Sunday, May 1st. And so we are jumping back into our series through the Gospel of Mark for the year 2022. And so we had 4 weeks back in February. And now we're picking it back up, and we'll do 5 weeks in May. All 5 weeks of May will be in the Gospel of Mark. And then we'll take some time. I have a series on the Lord's Prayer that will happen in June and July. And then we'll pick back up Mark in August and September. And we'll figure out how we finish that out towards the end of the year. So we'll do, so in this section, in part 2, I had our graphic designer change the graphic for part 2, and I'll have her change it again for part 3. So you'll notice the graphic is similar, but it's colored differently, and the photos are arranged a little differently. So we'll do 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. In this during the month of May. And there are some interesting tie-ins, particularly around Mother's Day and around Senior Sunday. And so in those particular chapters, there's and Mother's Day and Confirmation are the same day, so there's some really cool tie-ins there that we'll pull out. So but today we're going to look at Mark chapter 5. It's divided basically in half. The first 20 verses is Jesus healing the Gerosene demoniac, and so this picks up that story picks up right on the heels of Jesus stilling the storm, and if you remember, that came after that series of parables in chapter 4. So Jesus is he's sent the crowd away, and the windstorm arises. He's asleep on the cushion, and he rebukes them, tells the winds to be still, and they do. And they ask the question, "Who then is this?" And chapter 5 opens with a story of Jesus in a healing moment, telling them who he is. And so the Gerosene demoniac is so if you hold on, let me get my atlas. So I bought a new resource a couple weeks ago. It's the Holman Bible Atlas. It's kind of big, so but the it has full color pictures and maps and all kinds of things. And one of the reasons that I bought it was because it has big blow up maps, like bigger than the ones on the back of my Bible. So
right.
So we're just going to kind of look at where we're going here. So they went to the other side. They were in the boat, remember, and they go from one side to the other, and they land in the country of the Gerosenes, or the Gadarenes, depending on which translation you might have. And he steps out of the boat, and immediately this man with an unclean spirit, who lived among the tombs, who couldn't be chained down, who had broke himself out of the chains, and nobody had the strength to subdue him. He would howl and bruise himself with stones. He sees Jesus from a distance, and he runs and he bows down in front of him, and he shouts at the top of his voice, and this is verse 7, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." And then we get Mark telling us, "For he had said to him, 'Come out of the man, you unclean spirit.'" So right away, this man kind of descends upon Jesus, And he knows who Jesus is. The evil spirit that's living inside of him knows exactly who Jesus is, and he speaks it with his mouth, which is what what we've seen in the previous chapters in Mark. The evil spirits, the unclean spirits, they know who Jesus is. They identify him right away, and they're not afraid to speak it. And then therefore Jesus tries to hush them down. So in this particular case, Jesus asks the man, "What is your name?" And so he replies, "My name is Legion, for we are many." So the unclean spirit is not just one, but many spirits. And Legion is a Roman term. It's a military term for a unit, a military unit. And some say it's like 1,000. So verse 10 says, he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country, which is a weird phrase. I mean, when I read that, I'm like, out of the country, like to Assyria or to Egypt or something like that, out of the country. That was an interesting way to put that. And he says they were on the hillside. There was a great herd of swine that was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine and let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. Now, because there are pigs around, we know that we have gone into Gentile country, because the Jewish people wouldn't have had pigs running around, and they certainly wouldn't have been swine herds, which is the pig equivalent of shepherds. So we know we're in Gentile country. So Jesus is having this conversation with this Gentile who is possessed by this legion of demons, who knows exactly who he is. And the disciples are watching this happen. And he says, "Send us into the swine." And he does, and they rush off the bank and they drown in the sea. And then all of the swine herds run off into the city, and they tell what happened, and the people come, and now they descend upon Jesus, and they see the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had the legion. They were afraid. So they see this man that they know has been chained up and has been howling and has been possessed for a long time, who would never let anybody get close to him, is now in his right mind, and he's clothed, and and they are afraid. They're like, "What is happening here?" So those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. So they tell him, "Well, legion of demons goes off the pigs, and they go off the edge, and they all died." And so they begin to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. And so they for some reason, this miracle that has happened, this healing that has happened, this exorcism that's happened, sends them to a place where they don't want Jesus to even be near them at this point. And so he gets back in the boat, and the man who was possessed by demons wants to go with Jesus. But Jesus said he refuses. He refuses to let the man come with him. But he says, he gives him an assignment. He says, "Go home to your friends, tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And so verse 20 says, he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis, which is the region of 10 cities, how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. So he sends this man who's been healed and has had his demons exorcised back to be an evangelist for what Jesus has done for him. The very Jesus that this whole town showed up and was like, "Please leave, please go away. We don't want anything to do with you." He sends him back to proclaim what Jesus has done for them. So again, it's a Gentile country, Gentile portion of the area, and that's indicated by the pigs. So that's the setup. So now Jesus gets in the boat and he's crossing back over to the other side. So he's going back to the Israel, back into the Judean side of the Sea of Galilee. And he gets there and a crowd gathers around him, and a synagogue leader, so now we're dealing with Jewish people again, named Jairus comes, and he says he has a daughter who's at the point of death, and he wants Jesus to come and lay hands on her so that she may be made well and live. And so Jesus agrees to go. Now, I want to put a pause right there, because what's going to happen next is a unique characteristic of the Gospel of Mark, which is what scholars call the Markin Sandwich, where there are two stories that are interspersed. So Mark starts a story and then interjects another story that's related to it, and then finishes the first story. So watch what happens. So there's Jairus, his daughter, who's at the point of death, has asked Jesus to come with him, and so he goes. So then continuing on in verse 24, a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. And now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She'd endured much. She was no better, rather grew worse. She heard about Jesus, came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." And immediately her hemorrhage stops. She felt in her body that she was healed. And immediately, this is verse 30, immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my clothes?" And his disciples look at him and like, "You're crazy. Don't you see how everybody is pressing in on you? Who touched me?" So verse 32 says he looked around to see who had done it. The woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him and told him the whole truth. Then he says to her in verse 34, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." All right. I'm going to stop right there for a second. And I want you to notice there's been a phrase that's been repeated 3 times, made well. So in verse 23, Jairus wants his daughter made well. In in verse 28, the woman with the hemorrhage says, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." And there's a related phrase in verse 29 where she says that she felt in her body that she was healed from her disease. And then in verse 34, Jesus says to the woman, "Your faith has made you well." So there's this repetition of being made well, and it's all related to the Greek word sozo, which is the root word that we get for savior, salvation, and so it keeps coming back. So keep watching or keep listening. So verse 35. So we've had one piece of bread, we've had some meat, and now we're moving to the other piece of bread, the second half of the opening story. So Jairus and his daughter come back onto the scene. So verse 35, while he was still speaking, some people came from, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they had said, Jesus says to the leader, "Do not fear, only believe." And then only Peter, James, and John get to go in along with mom and dad. And there's a commotion outside. There are people weeping and wailing loudly outside the house. And he goes, "Why are you making this commotion? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laugh at him. And so he puts everybody outside, takes the child's father and mother, and Peter, James, and John with him. And he takes the girl by her hand, and he says to her, "Talitha kum," which is Aramaic for "little girl, get up." And immediately the girl gets up, begins to walk about. She was 12 years of age. And at this, they were overcome with amazement. And he strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. So we see that there's 2 parts of the Jairus and his daughter story. And there's this woman with the hemorrhaging that's in between. So that's why they call it the Markin Sandwich. So there's two stories that are split apart and interspersed with one another, and they're related to one another. And this isn't the only time this happens in the Gospel of Mark. There's about three other times it happens. But it's a unique way that Mark tells the story of Jesus. And each time you see how interlaced the stories are. So I'll just, I'll go, let me see. I wrote down a few things that are common between these two stories or related to one another in these two stories. So first of all, both of the main people in the story are women. There's a woman and a girl, and they are both on the brink of death. The daughter is at the point of death, and the woman with the bleeding has had this bleeding for 12 years, and every time she goes to see a doctor, she doesn't get any better. She actually gets worse. So she's getting closer and closer to death. So there's large crowds in both scenes. There's the crowd that's gathering with Jesus as he's traveling. But then there's also the crowd at Jairus's house that's weeping and wailing. So there's just lots of people around in this moment, and that comes into play when the woman touches Jesus's cloak, and he looks around. The way that the language reads is that he sort of looking in the area and is like looking intently at what's happening around him. And then both the woman and the little girl are made well, and both of them are referred to as daughters. Did you catch that? So it's Jairus's daughter, but then in verse 34, Jesus says to this woman, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So Jesus is drawing these two characters together, and that in using the same descriptor of them. So in both cases, there is disbelief of the healing. The woman comes to Jesus in fear and trembling that she's done something wrong, that reaching out and touching his cloak, which I'll get to in just a minute, is wrong, and so there's this wondering if he's going to take it back or something like that. But then there's the disbelief of the crowd at Jairus's house, in that Jesus says, she's not dead, she's just sleeping, and they laugh at him. So there's a disbelief on both sides. There's fear on both sides. The woman is afraid of repercussions from what she's done. But then Jesus tells Jairus, do not fear, only believe, when he gets word that his daughter has died. And there's a connection between the two female characters with the number 12. The woman had bleeding for 12 years, and this daughter, Jairus' daughter, was 12 years old. And 12, again, is a significant number in Scripture, relates to Israel. So let's see. There's also there's walking about after healing. So the little girl gets up. Jesus takes up her hand and she begins to walk about. And the woman was able to walk after the healing. She comes to Jesus. Yes, she falls down before him, but then he tells her to go in peace. So there's this movement that she has as well. And then also both healings happen immediately. As soon as the woman touches Jesus's cloak, immediately her hemorrhage stops, and she feels in her body that she was healed. And then as Jesus takes the little girl's hand and speaks to her, immediately the girl gets up and begins to walk about. So there's both healings happen immediately, which is Mark's favorite word. It's his favorite word to use as to describe what happens around Jesus. Is, he's always on the move. He's going immediately from here to there, and then when these healings occur, they happen immediately, right away. There's no pause. So anyway, that's just a few of the connections between these stories that put them together, and draw the connections to one another. Now, the interesting thing about the woman with hemorrhaging is that there are Levitical laws about a woman who has active bleeding, or anybody who has active bleeding, but particularly women. And there's Levitical precedent for specifically menstruation, that women can't, anything that women sit on or touch or wear or anything like that during that period of time while there's active bleeding going on is unclean. And anybody who touches those things becomes unclean. And so if this woman has been bleeding for 12 years, it's basically telling us that she has been cast to the edges of society, even farther than women who are experiencing normal menstruation. And so she would be alone. She would be isolated, and she would obviously have been of some means to have been able to afford doctors for 12 years. But we're not told anything about her family. We're not told anything about what, a husband or anything like that. But we do know that she hasn't gotten any better, and it's been 12 years. So for her to make her way in the crowd towards Jesus, again, if this crowd is pressing in on Jesus, then she would have had to have navigated her way through that crowd, most likely touching people along the way at some level, thereby intentionally or unintentionally making them unclean, ritualistically or pure, ritualistically unclean, and all for the sake of her trying to get to Jesus, to touch his cloak. If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. And who knows? I mean, if she's in the place where she normally resides, my guess is the people who were there around Jesus would have known who she was, at least at some level, and known her ailment, and wondered, number one, why is she out and about public, and number two, why is she getting so close to other people to potentially get them to bring impurity upon them. But she, for her, Jesus says her faith has made you well. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace, which is one thing she probably did not have. She did not have peace in the last 12 years. And she certainly didn't have healing from her disease. So she comes to Jesus in faith, the same way that Jairus comes to Jesus in faith. He says, don't be afraid, have faith, only believe. Faith and belief are related words. And so anyway, so she risks, this woman risks a lot to come to Jesus, to just touch his cloak. And I've always, when I visualize this story happening, I visualize sort of her kind of weaving her way through the crowd, and then like as far as her arm will reach, and she just reaches out and goes, and then pulls her arm back. Like that's all she could risk at that point, hoping that number one, it would work. Number two, nobody would notice. But Jesus notices. It's almost like he gets an electro, sort of moment, an electro shock or something like that that comes as soon as she touches him, and he's aware that power. So power there is the word dunamis, which is the word we get for we translate into things like dynamite. It's the same thing. It's this explosive kind of word. So the power had gone out from him, and he said and Jesus never asks a question he doesn't know the answer to. If you notice that, he doesn't ever ask a question he doesn't know the answer to. So he knows that somebody touched him, and not in a way that just the jostling of the crowd, but in a way that was intentional, and in a way that he knew that that something had happened. And so hold on, I looked this up just a little bit ago. So when so the word for touch is it's a touch, to lay hold of, and properly it's translated as touching that influences. So it does something when you use this word, it influences, it makes something else happen. So the English word that we get from this word is haptics. So like on your phone, when you touch something and you feel it, you feel it vibrate just a little bit, those are called haptics. That's from this word. So that you've selected something, or you've moved something or changed something because you get that little vibration. That's the word here. And so Jesus has this little as she touches his clothing, because she did it with intention, she did it with purpose, and so what Jesus does in the other story, in Jairus's daughter story, is he reaches out his hand and he holds her hand, and he speaks to her and pulls her up. So there's this intention of touching her hand and pulling her up and lifting her up as she is being healed, as she's being restored to life. So, all right, good stuff. Really good stuff in this story that just kind of, the more I dig into it, the more I like this story. So one of the first times I preached on this story, I knew that it was called the Markin Sandwich, and I made this illustration about me liking sandwiches, and this was my favorite biblical sandwich. My favorite real life sandwich was a muffaletta, which it still is. It's a fantastic sandwich. But I think I did a disservice to the text by making that analogy. But that was 10 years ago. So.
Well, we love Schlotsky's and Jason's for their muffalettas, so we understand.
Oh yeah, good stuff. All right, cool. And again, one of the features of Mark is the original language that Jesus would have spoke, the Aramaic. It's included here, the Talitha Kum, but then he defines it. A couple of places he doesn't translate it, but it's again, that's one of the features of Mark, that he puts in some of Jesus actually speaking, more than just the translated from the Greek. So it reminds us again that he was from Palestine, spoke a Hebrew derivative language, not derivative in a bad way, but all right. So questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
Well, another similarity that I think with the stories is that both with the woman that was bleeding and the little girl, they both caused someone to be unclean by touching them. According to the laws, that because they couldn't touch a dead body.
Yeah, can't touch a dead body.
Be ceremonially unclean. My next question was, Jesus did a lot of this touching. What could he, since he was the Son of God, but yet human, would he have to be ceremonially cleansed, like to go to the temple or something, or did he get away with it? Because I mean, like he was, touching all the time people that were sick or bleeding or lepers, and I would think that he would have to spend a whole lot of time getting cleaned from all that.
You know what? I don't know. That's a really good question, though. Really good question. We don't see. There's no record of Jesus, going to the temple and making atonement sacrifices for being ritualistically or ceremonially unclean. That's a hard word to say, but
it is.
He sends others to do so, but we don't have a record of him doing that. I'll have to think about that. And
God must have given him a pass for that.
Maybe. That's.
I don't know. That just kind of came up because I thought about, well, you're saying about the woman, he would cause anybody to be unclean, and then I thought, well, with touching a dead body, that would also cause them to be unclean, and
Yep. Okay. Very good. Good observation. Thank you.
Sometimes I get a light bulb.
Hey, love it when that happens.
She brought up the similarities, some of the things that are similar but opposite, if you will.
Yep.
He was wealthy. She was poor. She'd spent all of her money on all of her doctors. So he was wealthy. She was poor. His was done, or his request at least came publicly, whereas she tried to keep hers as secret as possible.
There you go.
Let's see, you already talked about immediately, and one of them was done secretly, whereas one was done publicly. Yeah, very, very interesting situation there with all that was going on. I did find something that was a little bit of a joke, if you will. It's not, but ancient rabbis had many different formulas to help a woman afflicted like this. Rabbi Jochanan said, take some gum of this and alum and this and that, the weight of a zuzi each, then let them be bruised together and give in wine to the woman that hath an issue of blood. But if this fails, try this. But if this fails, it just keeps going and going. If this fails, fails. Right. One of them was to have, it was kind of like a hiccup type of thing. Have her meet a place where two ways meet, and let her hold a cup of wine in her hand and let somebody come up behind her and scare her. Like she got hiccups or something. At any rate, just interesting stuff. There's some discussion too about how'd you pronounce Jairus?
Jairus.
How Jairus' situation is a little bit similar to the centurion in Luke. But the centurion believes and it's taken care of without Jesus going there at all.
Right.
Whereas as Jairus you got to come touch her. So, let's see if there's anything else here. I just can't get by without saying.
Well, and the centurion was Roman. So, you know, it may have been he may have traveled farther than Jairus, but nonetheless, the healing is different. The healing for the centurion was, it's done, and this is Jesus goes. So.
You think sometimes that you know, it depends on, you know, whether he does it long distance or whether he actually is there or goes there. Does it maybe have to depend with the people he's trying to teach, or you know, the crowd of people that are surrounding him, whether they need to see the visible proof of a healing rather than hear that it was done from a distance?
Yeah, I think there's I think Jesus does everything with a point. So if there are, you know, again, the whole, you know, do not fear, but only believe, that he speaks to Jairus. I mean, he's affirming, number one, his statement that he says, if you touch her, she'll be made well. And then coming back around to giving him assurance that, you know, trust me, don't trust the people who just came and reported that your daughter's dead. Don't bother the teacher anymore. Trust me. And so he goes and he shows him. And then, you know, so yeah, I think there's a point that Jesus is making to those who are in that immediate vicinity, and to the people who are asking, or you know, who are afflicted. So I think that he can, you know, I have no doubt that in this particular situation, Jesus could have gone and had been done. And in just the same way as the woman touching the cloak and it's done. But in this particular case, he's connecting these two women together, and I think ultimately he's teaching us to see, you know, whether it's, you know, our own affliction or whether it's someone that we love and their affliction. Jesus is calling us to trust those we love to him, as well as entrust ourselves to him. So whether we need healing or whether we know someone who needs healing, to call upon him and to invite him to make that person whole. And so, you know, I talked about that phrase being made well, being, you know, it appears 4 different times. And then there's this idea of, you know, being, you being made well, being made whole. It's from the Greek word sozo, which is where we get salvation and savior. It's this idea of coming together in wholeness. So it has healing aspects to it, and restoration aspects to it, and it's so it's larger than just this woman's bleeding stopping. Her whole life has been made whole again, because she was on the outskirts, and now she has been brought back into community because she has been made well. This little girl has been made well, and she's been brought back to life and restored to the community. And so there's this, it's larger than just the immediate context. It's communal, and which, again, scripturally, life is lived communally, and everybody relates to everybody else, and when there is discord in one segment of the community that ripples over to other segments of the community. And think about the time in the wilderness, and when there was grumbling about food or water, or are we ever going to get there kind of things, or we should go back, and at least they had, at least we had food to eat back there. When there was grumbling and complaining and there was discord, then it affected not just the one person or the family or whatever that was upset. It affected the whole community. And when someone is disconnected, it affects the whole community. So whether that's a woman who's been on the outskirts for 12 years, or whether that's a little girl who's on the verge of death, there's those ripples that are felt. And so that idea of being made well is larger than just not bleeding anymore and breathing again, but to be fully restored into the family and into the community.
Is this the only healing that he does by the touch of the cloth?
I don't think so. Let's see. So in chapter 6, we see that there's healing of the sick in Gennesaret, and they come and this is verse 56. They lay the sick in the marketplaces, and they beg him that he might touch even the fringe of his cloak. Again, this whole idea of touching his cloak. And all who touched it were healed. So there's touching the cloak.
Okay.
The deaf man, chapter 7, the deaf man, Jesus puts his fingers in his ears, so he touches him there. He does this weird little kind of like, he puts his fingers in his ears, and he spits and he touches the man's tongue, and he says ephphatha, which means be open, and immediately his ears were open. I'll talk about that one in a few weeks.
Okay.
So yes, he does touch. Let's see. Yeah, he lays his hand on the blind man in Bethsaida.
Yeah, I guess, but at least in my translation, it doesn't mention feeling the power go out of him or whatever.
Right. That phenomenon is unique in this story.
Okay.
That I think it's not the only time that power word is used, but oh no, that was pressed on. Anyway, but yes, that sort of that haptic kind of moment is here in this particular story.
That word HAPTIC?
HAPITC or HAPTIC.
TIC. Okay. I have to look that one up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, in settings on your phone, you have haptic settings, and that's where you can, because it's a touch screen, it gives a little. It's not a shock, but it just vibrates just ever so slightly, and you can turn them on or off, depending on your preferences. So, yeah.
Okay.
There you go. Cool. All right. Well, I think that's about all I got for today. So again, this is for the week of May 1st. And the home sheet will go out that Sunday and be available for you. I'll have it emailed to you. And my goal is to, have it printed for y'all too, if you want to pick it up on the way back. Didn't do that on Sunday. So anyway, but it did get
Okay.
emailed, and it's on the website.
Yep.
Very good. All right. Well, appreciate y'all. Let me know
right.
if you have any
Thank you.
questions. Yeah, you're welcome. Have a great day. We'll see you.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.